So, welcome to Behind the Rabbit, and excited to have you all today on the show. And today we're gonna talk about how AI agents, especially AI coding agents, are creating major code review bottleneck. Of course, CodeRabbit is a code review company, but in reality, I think a lot of developers or open source projects that we work with, users that we talk to, individual developers, to everyone who's trying to use AI for the fun of it, end up having this sort of like large bunch of code that's lying around, and they don't know what they're checked in, and they just want to better understand what the code is and how AI has or AI coding agents have written it. And in this session, the show that we will discuss about the velocity problem and who is being actually which group is being disrupted, especially in enterprises or teams all across, and how teams are adopting various new tools or how they are like changing the culture. We keep hearing about SDLC getting, uh, you know, uh, changed to a different way, new tools, new processes. In the show today, we have a couple of guests. And Harjot, welcome to the show. And Harjot is creator of CodeRabbit. I would love to introduce Harjot as a creator of CodeRabbit than like CEO and co-founder of CodeRabbit. He's the mastermind behind like the AI agent, and Harjot co-founded CodeRabbit like in around like 2023, 24. One of the very early AI agents and AI code review agents that's like omnipresent on several repositories that you could see on GitHub. And the interesting thing with Hajot is he experienced the pain at first hand, and he created CodeRabbit. At the same point of time, he's a CEO who ships every day, and so we dogfood CodeRabbit internally a lot, and as a clear engineering leader and someone who's like a technical architect in various forms, I think he experiences problem, and he also like solves this day to day. Built CodeRabbit from ground up, and uh, looks after the core persona that CodeRabbit really ships for. And then I expect that today we have a lot of insights to unpack from Hajot. And we also have Erik, who's the developer experience lead, works with a lot of communities, and Erik does a lot of events in various communities, work with open source, publishes several packages, and also codes a lot with AI, so he could feel the pain as well. So we're going to talk more about that as well. So to start with, I think I'll talk about. Let us talk a bit more about the agent velocity and how AI agents are kind of like, I hate to use this word again and again, called disruption, and but then disrupting the regular SDLC flow, wherein usually we used to do the regular requirement analysis, doing the sprint planning. Some teams do this at scale and come across. So, Harjo, to your point, like, do you want to explain a bit more about the new reality and how AI coding assistants now or agents have changed the game?
Thanks, Arvind. Yes, I mean, this is kind of like a very interesting inflection point that we are like witnessing in the way software gets written, shipped into production. Started back in like all the way back in 2023 and 2022, like with GitHub Copilot coming out. First of all, bringing some of these advanced AI capabilities with tab completion. And very quickly in the last 6 or 9 months, we have seen like autonomous agents taking off, Cloud Code Cursor kind of leading the pack with going from a high level prompt to large scale code features getting built out quickly or bugs getting fixed and so on. Yeah, so the way I've seen the market is like once the developers are hooked up into these systems, they can just go back. Like it's a habit forming. There's a habit forming kind of products, very addictive, right? So I mean, I've seen like even in our company, a lot of the developers, like especially junior developers, they don't like code like the way I used to code like 5 years back. Like now they're like really going to ask Claude Code a question, even a simple question to explain the code base. They're not navigating the code anymore. They're just always defaulting to go to AI. So yeah, very exciting time to be a developer right now, and also like a vendor of dev tooling. Like the ground's like changing so quickly, the habits, the UX, the developer experience, a lot of new paradigms, abstractions getting created.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think Eric, please add your thoughts as well. To your point, I think at some time I used to go to the entry point in any app and then start debugging the code to understand a bit more and learn the code in that way, understand modules, submodules, and put log lines. I think today you just ask like, where are the Prisma schemas, and then or just talk about like, how do I? In fact, actually, I've seen people making SQL queries from your code base, your TypeScript code base, just by asking Claude Code. Claude Code will give you a proper SQL query that you can go and run. I've seen business analysts and folks on the business side do that pretty easily. So it's definitely like an inflection point where there's like one way you are democratizing and bringing a lot of people to be able to interact with your code base. At the same time, you're opening up and then pushing a lot of code. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think kind of going off some of the threads that Harjot opened there was like the being a vendor for DevTool right now is just wild because there's so many things that are still being figured out, like fundamental things, and so things are changing really fast. And I'm out over at AI Engineer right now at the AI Engineer Code Summit in New York. Yesterday, there was a talk from someone who I think is maybe 40 years experience in the industry. And for them, it's the same feeling I have that it's the most exciting time to do engineering right now. This is, fundamentally new technology and just wave after wave after wave of changes. Yeah, maybe going off of like the searching code base things, maybe
Yeah.
Harjot could talk about like
So essentially, yeah, the barrier has been lowered. Like now, what we're seeing is the earlier the barrier was like you have to learn a new language. Like you don't know TypeScript. If let's say your company is using TypeScript, you have to first learn that or Rust or something, right? Now what we're seeing is like developers are now very comfortable, like even picking up Rust, for instance, which is very hard otherwise, right? They're letting AI do a lot of the heavy lifting, and through AI generated code, they're also like picking up those skills faster. In a way, like we've seen acceleration in a lot of areas, like especially the junior developers. I've seen like a lot of these like younger 20-year-olds have been very, very successful with AI compared to people who have been coding for like 20 years. So for them, it's like a bigger change, newer habits. Whereas like by default, all the new grads we hire and all, they're like much more like more accustomed to using these agents, right? And they're also finding like innovative ways these agents can be used. Like I think one of the things is that we have seen even the model labs don't even know the full extent of where these models are more successful or less successful. And a lot of people are discovering interesting surface areas which are undiscovered, like new patterns on. Like if you look at this coding, like I mean, a lot of people are now like doing this plan mode, like Cursor added that, like just to be more successful, or writing markdown files with task lists. So like everyone's like building their like interesting workflows around these agents to be successful, right? And these agents are now like, running for longer and longer periods of time, like and also like describing that destination where you want to be is an art in itself. Like I've got at CodeRabbit, we have so many developers, and I look at their usage stats in Cursor or Cloud Code. You could actually see how much they like doing on-demand usage. You will see like there are a few developers which are like really going gangbusters with AI usage, while some of the developers are like still struggling and they're doing basic tab completion and then so on. So it's very interesting. See, it's very lopsided. Like it's very hard to even tell like what makes like what kind of a trait you will look for a developer that they'll be good, like really leverage these AI tools to the maximum extent. Um, um, because that makes it like a 10x difference in the velocity, right? I mean, if you're gonna use these new tools, you're gonna obviously run faster. But it's like still like very new that we're also like trying to figure out like what makes a good engineer in this new world.
yeah, I can maybe also add that like what's the expression? Everything old is new again. So there's these like
Mhm.
old techniques or like old principles of like you should write good documentation, or you should write good tickets that are clear of like what the requirements are for a new feature or something like that. And I'm guilty of in my career just being like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'll just build the thing. But now, like I think a real distinction between quality of results comes from how much did you think before you started implementing, especially with agents.
That's right. In a way, yes, you're right. I mean, the bottlenecks have kind of shifted. Like now we are like putting the stress on the other areas which were mostly overlooked. And like one thing is, of course, the reviews. I mean, we do code reviews at CodeRabbit, and that's exactly what we saw 2 years back. That as the volume of code will go up, senior like developers who are now have to like understand the changes, like what exactly they're doing, what's the impact, and it's not going to be possible for humans to keep up. And that hypothesis turned out to be true, and that's why we've seen that kind of traction we have seen in the market. The other bottleneck, as you said, Eric, is now describing what to build. Like, so the two problems in this new world is one is you're either creating a prompt, like you have to like bring in all the context, you figure out what the prompt should be, and or you are like reviewing the work, right? These are the two things remaining. Rest is the cursor magic and the cloud code magic. These agents are really amazing, right? But as a developer, those are the two things you have to figure out. Either you have to now bring the context, tag the right kind of files or the directories, or describe what you want. And that's really critical. Or you have to review the work, right?
Yeah. So culturally, I think this has a lot of impact. If you go 2 steps back when we started, like we're talking about SDLC and how it has been changing, right? Going back, people, I've been in teams where they follow religiously a lot of Scrum practices. There was Agile coach. I mean, where Agile was getting implemented. So I think currently, if you see, there are epic stories, tasks, all of that is looks very different to me in general. It's so hard to because people are shipping larger PRs. They're able to code faster, ship faster. So your T-shirt sizing or other things that you used to estimate for is different right now. I don't think if it matters. And then at the same time, I think like you said, Harjot, right? A lot of this wave of being better productive creates side effects or problems that also need to be solved. So AI code generation is so useful to many developers, but at the same point of time, in a way, there are all these cultural nuances that people used to follow in traditional just prior to this, and now those needs to be addressed, or like they need to be unblocked so people adopt AI more.
That's right. And sizing has like really become weird in this new world. Like it's very interesting. Like these AI agents are extremely good with some use cases while still being extremely bad with the others. Like some tasks which like pre-gen AI would take a lot of time, like are now so easy with AI. Like for example, like some things where AI has been really successful and very clear product market fit has been scaffolding new apps or translating from one language to another. Like when you're like migrating from, let's say, Java to something more modern like Golang, like those have been very effective. Or writing unit tests, you've been very effective. That's one use case very clearly that developers were taking longer while AI can go there, move fast, and then also iterate on the unit tests, right? So clearly, like, yeah, so this t-shirt sizing, as you said, is now, you have to now take into account, like if there's a task which is a really good fit for AI, you're going to do that in minutes, which used to take like hours or weeks in the past. While there's still some tasks where even despite having AI, you can't move fast because those are like complex changes into complex code bases, like complex refactors. Like those are the places where like the human is still in the loop, they're in the driving seat. Even though they're using AI agents, they're like more real-time conversation versus running some background agent that does the work. The success rate on those kind of tasks has been very low. But that said, even in those kind of tasks, AI is behaving like is a really great like assistant or a co-pilot. Whether it's a tab completion or even like the interactive synchronous agent calls that you do with Cloud Code.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a question for you, Arjot. There are a lot of people who had an interesting conversation the other day around Terraform, and that LMs tend to not do really well with Terraform, and kind of the argument is that most scaled Terraform files are in private repos of large enterprises, so that's not in the training set. How do you think about things like that, and like how to effectively augment LLMs so that they can do things they may not have a bunch of signal on in their training?
No, that's a great point. I think that's been one of the things we have seen that if you are like working with the training data, you really understand what the training data and the distribution there looks like. Only then you can use these models to the fullest. I mean, as a vendor, we pay a very close attention to what's in the what goes into the training data, what these models are good at, not good at. A few things stand out, like there's some languages which have been mainstream with enough training data, like Python or TypeScript, like you're gonna see good results. Um, on the other hand, like some of these languages are fast moving, especially in the TypeScript ecosystem. Like you have like new version of Zod coming out every other week, or something in the next year is changing, the API is changing, and then the knowledge cutoff is the other problem. Like I mean, these models are also like cutoff is like 2024 or like 20 no early 2025. Then you're losing on last 6 months of knowledge. Like even with the new versions of Golang and so on, new syntax, you kind of struggle, right? The other area has been, you're right, like the training data has been primarily GitHub open source, right? Or Stack Overflow questions, I believe. Right? So the question, then the like other large data sets which are enterprise, which are still like something these model labs haven't had access to. Now, but on the other hand, if you look at like these model labs have been hiring large number of contractors and these gig workers who are just helping them label these data sets and actually solve problems for them, teaching these models how to code. Actually, interestingly, the reason is like the coding has been the number one use case for all the model providers. I would say it's the strongest product market fit areas for generative AI right now. And we have seen, of course, Cursor is like ahead of the pack, but even the model labs themselves want to play a big part of it. If you look at Codex, and now OpenAI is now training a different kind of models for coding, optimized for that. And going back to your question, now that we are seeing even models, they're going to be two-fourths. One is like general purpose GPT-5 or GPT-5, and now you have the Codex flavored of models, which are like coding optimized. And on the other hand, Anthropic, if you look at Sonnet, that's always been coding optimized. I don't think beyond coding they have that many use cases like ChatGPT has. First, like Sonnet is kind of the number one model when it comes to code generation, agentic code generation, I would say, right? And that's what's like happening. I think coding data and the training is industry wide problem. I think the players like model labs themselves are like spending very large amount of money on getting these models like proficient on these newer languages like Rust or something, or even like Terraform at scale, like where the training data is right now very hard to get.
Yeah. But in general, I think day to day, whenever I speak to anyone, while we discuss all of this, I see that people are adopting AI to some shape or not. People are like really wary of, okay, what would have happened if I don't know it? It looks like a very weird or like really like a point where it's new internet, especially for developers. And then some people, not just startups, I think even in large teams like Fortune 100, there are some developers who are actually shipping more code. And I am talking about companies where there are like KLOC matters, right? People look at KLOCs for performance. I don't know if KLOC is kilo lines of code. People measure that. And then and the KLOC number is out of turn. And then there is also other side effect that I want to talk about, right? In this area, like what do you think about KLOC and what sort of like metrics that define? Say the other metric, other thought is say engineering and engineering analytics, engineering productivity. There are all of these tools around this area where people measure everything. Now with all these metrics going off, and then earlier you used to plan for capacity using these tools, like in the resources and everything. Now your PRs are coming big, and like you can't hire a PR reviewer. PR reviewer is not a role, right? So it's very interesting time.
Yeah, and by the way, PR reviewers are a role now. Like I've seen some companies like which are like vibe coding cleanup, right? And they're like hiring, like you basically pay them for as contractors to come and review your PR. The companies are starting that service. I've seen a few like LinkedIn messages around that or Twitter messages, right? But yeah, going back to your question, like I agree, like the engineering metrics, the productivity, like it's all changed. Like the landscape has changed. Like how do you understand productivity? Like especially like even on the hiring side, like we used to like look at, hey, a person has a good GitHub activity means they are a good coder. Like sometimes that's a good proxy. But now you're seeing like people with all this like green carpet activity on like GitHub, and once you look at what they're doing in open source, it's like all Cloud Code generated slop. not even like merging anywhere, right? So it's very hard to tell whether they're generating thoughtful code or it's just AI writing a lot of code, and that's what they're shipping. And when AI writes a code, also we have seen the code tends to be overly verbose. Like some of these junior developers, they don't know all the good practices or not to like dry principles and so on, right? Or solid principles. What they will do sometimes is let cloud code go crazy, and sometimes they won't even reuse the existing data structures or existing utilities they might already have in the code base. There will be a lot of repetition. So some of those metrics have gone like completely crazy if you're going to just look at those. So for leaders and all, like looking at KLOC as on the surface alone is a very, very wrong signal in the new world. Directionally, yes, at least it means that, okay, someone's like at least using AI to code and they're spending time on coding, but whether it's like meaningful code or not, or whether they're good coder is you still have to talk to them. I mean, or actually see their work, but it's very hard to tell right now with AI.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
saw some
Eric.
research come out of a Stanford research group, and they were working with enterprise partners. I don't think they could disclose who, but they would see these like lines of code kind of increases or number of PRs like merged increase, and because they're a large enterprise, they're using kind of classic metrics to understand what's going on in the engineering work, and but what the researchers did was they also did a metric of rework PRs. So how many lines of code are actually code to this churning over previous code, so they could compute a rate of rework, and these were like skyrocketing along with the lines of code. So
Right. I think people are still figuring out the strengths, and we sometimes like people are overhyping that, hey, we have fully autonomous AI coding agent. I mean, the most famous one being Devin, that viral video that went in autonomous coding, and all the developers like, okay, now it's going to take our jobs away. I mean, that was an impressive demo, like, but the reality is like really, really different. Right now, we're seeing um, people tried all these different form factors, like background agents is one example. Like, can we go from issue to a PR, and how successful those PRs are going to be when it comes to mergeability? So people tried that for a while. A lot of PRs getting opened on open source projects. We've seen so much spam on the open source side. We work with so many maintainers, and that's been a big pain point. Like with all these PRs being opened by like random people, and they look good on surface, but once you start looking and you see all these like holes in these PRs, right? And that's the thing, like with these like agents, like if you're not describing the destination very accurately, you're almost always ending up in a wrong place, right? The success rate on that has been rather low. Maybe a few use cases, like maybe some unit tests or adding some log lines somewhere, maybe those kind of tasks you can one shot. But more often than not, the human has to be in the driving seat. We are like far away from like level 4 autonomy or whatever you want to call it, right? So most of the work is still tactical. Like you can use AI to do like 70%, 80% heavy lifting directionally, but then you have to clean up that code, rework it, hook it up in the right way into your existing code. That's where still the real engineering matters.
you can't just say make this code performant, or make this code better.
Yeah. I mean, small sections you can. If it's just a single function, you can say, okay, now make it like more optimal, like change the algorithm or something. But okay, now if you're changing code across multiple file, complex code base, it's not there yet. I mean, I know OpenAI and Anthropic are now in their marketing talking about agents learning for a longer period of time. Like yesterday, the model that came out, one of the benchmarks, or it ran for like 12 hours or something, right? I mean, crazy numbers there now. The question really is like, what kind of tasks they're like seeing success there, right? And I believe that it's not like for all kinds of tasks, like because the bigger problem remains describing your destination. It's not like Tesla where you say I want to go from point A to B and it takes you there. You really have to describe in detail what kind of like libraries you want to see, what kind of coding practices you're following. There's like so many details when it comes to actually building software. You're adding all this like Claude MD file, agent MD file, and these agents are also known not very good at following those instructions very well. I mean, so yeah, I mean, the agents are still very early. I think they're useful in the world has already changed. So I'm not saying it's not changed, but at the same time, some of these fears around agents completely eliminating the role of software developers, those are like really overblown.
Yeah. In general, like who is feeling the pain, right? I think the most that I see is definitely like people not necessarily everybody reviews the code, or everybody, like once they ships the code, I think like they look at the peers like code, or like a team in general, like everyone needs to know everything if they're working on a common module at least. I believe like there is one segment like this who has to review the code and then understand that someone is actually like in databases or like distributed system, you have like a noisy neighbor where probably a peer is shipping too much, and then you are someone who still uses AI, but then you're careful, you ship really good, but then really crafted PRs, right? I've seen such colleagues as well. And then there is someone who's like want to code really fast and really good, still works, but then have to review. So that's one group. I feel like the peers and people who are coworkers using AI. And then I think there's also the leadership in general, engineering leadership. We spoke about metrics, but I think like the people who are managing these teams, they have like slightly newer problem in managing these AI. I also feel maybe we should touch upon different tastes of these models, right? Say probably Sonnet. I've seen like it's very eager. I ask probably one query and it gives me 5 or 6 methods, approaches, right? And sometimes it chooses one, sometimes it doesn't, and maybe I'll choose something else. But then you go to Codex, it's more it's different. It feels different. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. And it's very interesting, even the personalities of these models coming out of model labs. There's a lot of that taste of Anthropic is very interesting, like versus OpenAI, which is more of a very IIQ models, which are like doing a lot of reasoning but slow. On the other hand, Sonnet is like a model which has prepared for the exam upfront, so it's a lot of knowledge. It doesn't like think as much on the fly, but it has a lot of good knowledge in it. So it's very interesting to see the trade-offs. And the eagerness is the other part. Like these labs have been optimizing their RL feedback loops to train on basically optimizing for like decisions, like quick decisions, and making sure that loop progresses versus stalls, right? Bias for action, I would say the word is like, so a lot of bias for action is getting trained into the systems. But going back to the other point, like the matrix and all, like, I mean, that's a very interesting topic, right? So we've seen like the people who are most happy are like junior developers and all, like, because they are like getting up level very quickly. The barriers have removed. They're also very eager to use these new tools. Really, the senior developers are the ones feeling the most pain, especially on the review side. I was like talking, we had a like dinner last night with some of the execs. One of the things was they're actually preventing their junior developers from actually using the agents because there's so much slop getting created. So like actually now preventing people from opening all the PRs they're opening right now. And even at the leadership level, like I think everyone tries when AI came out, took off. They thought this would be a silver bullet where they can now maybe hire fewer engineers, see more velocity. But one of the things they're realizing is none of that has happened, actually, which is very interesting. Even though Cursor, we are, like, say they're opening 40% more PRs, but that is not really translating to 40% more software getting shipped. 40% PRs does not mean 40% more software, actually. And that's what like when we are also like as a vendor going to the organizations, the expectations are so inflated with AI, like on what it could do. And everyone wants to measure that silver bullet as in, am I shipping more features? Right? And the answer is actually no. I mean, I know that some of these larger enterprises have been looking at the data. JPM did a big research of running with 1 year of like coding agents in the organization, but they've not seen any improvement. So it's very interesting, right? So some of the tasks, as I said, got accelerated, and some of the tasks you're not spending more time in the review. So even though you're going fast, but then you're stumbling somewhere else. And the metrics are like tricky. I think a lot of these like expectation have to like, it's like the hype cycle. Like you have to like, there's corrections going to happen on what really the impact of AI is. Of course, there's been some impact. A lot of people now use ChatGPT in their day-to-day life. But does it mean that I'm doing more marketing? If I'm using this agent, does it even mean that? So those kind of questions are still open. I don't think anyone has, even AI lab don't know how much economic impact ChatGPT has made. It's very hard to measure that, or how much, even on the coding side, the evals and understanding the actual, whether the needle has moved is a very, very hard problem with these systems. It's mostly vibes at this point. Yes, you can do a survey and people say, okay, I love it, I can live without it. So you go and buy that. It's mostly been vibe-based feedback and purchases. And even the evals have been broken, like Anthropic and all. But they're moving away from the standard, very rigid evals and benchmarks to more taste thing. I think it's becoming a more of a taste game. The only way you know the success of a model is if people are using it and liking it, right? So Cursor is now trying to introduce faster models. You know, whether it's better than Sonnet, do people still love the taste and the tone and everything of Sonnet is a question mark. The same thing happened with GPT-4.1. I mean, they took it away, and then there were some people, okay, we love the personality of that model because you build an attachment to these systems. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty easy to tell when someone has really figured it out because especially if it's a publicly traded company, because you'll just see their profit margins just 1,000% in a quarter.
Yeah, it's not like industrial revolution where you're now suddenly seeing that kind of economic output, right? So we have been to what, 2.5 years, like the only use case working is coding. I mean, we haven't seen big disruption in, let's say, legal, like I know Harvey and all that there, but how many are actually, whether bills have gone down, we haven't seen that anything on our side. We still pay a lot of money to the corporate lawyers we have. So I can tell you, yeah, so that kind of productivity is still like not there in many areas. Coding also, like, yes, we're doing more code, but then the bottlenecks are there. But some things have still changed. Like when people love it, like developers can go back to the world without generative AI.
Yeah, I think it still is a net positive, at least for leave it like junior developers and anybody, right? The amount of context reduction in the context switching. Are you going out to all these Google, Stack Overflow, trying to find relative stuff? Yeah, I think that and all like makes 100% sense.
That's right. I mean, if you look at like generative AI, it doesn't make a 10x developer become 100x. That does not happen actually, right? Of course, they can automate a few parts of it, but it's not like they're like doing groundbreaking new work, right? It's still like trained on existing code and bringing those great examples to your workflow. Like you don't have to go to Stack Overflow, for example. Like that's a great point. Like that's what we see in code reviews. Like we are bringing in all that knowledge into that workflow, right? And the same thing, like, so it doesn't like, it makes like an average developer get closer to the 10x or 8x. Like for example, like I can now do marketing with AI. I'm not a marketer, but I could do like comic strips using the image generation and so on. But an actual artist would always be better than I am. So it just makes me maybe an average artist, right? Or makes me an average coder if I don't know coding. So that's the thing. Then it's only great for some tasks, right? But that said, the volume of code has definitely gone up. And it's like something, the pain point have shifted to either like you're creating a prompt or you are now reviewing the work. That remains a big pain point.
What do you think about like, it seems like it's a new skill that people can develop, right? Like, or an art. How can like a developer go from like a 1x to 10x faster, or leverage these tools?
There's like a lot of this like insights you have like into like once you're like playing with these models, you really understand like what they're really good at. Like, I mean, you have to really prompt these systems, and that's where we're seeing like, even in the market where I'm hearing like a lot of these junior computer science roles are struggling to get a job, while like some of the English major people are getting good jobs. Like interesting because they're really good apparently at prompting. Even people with more academic mindset have been very effective because they can really break down the task and what to do for the LLM. It's like a junior intern or something. Like you have to really break down the work and explain what they need to work on. Only then you can be successful, right? So there are like many tricks, and we prompt all the time, and we have seen like some of the prompts just go like they seem seemingly okay, but once you actually run them in production, they're completely bad. And sometimes the context and the prompt works really well, and the context is very important. Like prompt is one thing. Even a small little like bad context you throw in will send these agents off track. Especially with the reasoning model, they tend to overthink as well. So if you're going to put in like even a random snippet, they're going to overthink and over-index on that bad information and just go in the wrong direction. And then sometimes you have to go and debug like why it actually went in that direction. Then you realize, okay, I had myself made the tainted the context, right, at some point. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I think a lot of these tangents, I think, are still yet to be explored more. I think when it comes to enterprise, I think there's more nuance that needs to be filled in. So definitely that's going to be there. But then taking back the problem, right? I think when you talk about like more code being shipped, and then review being bottleneck, of course, like you can apply AI. Tools like CodeRabbit, especially like come and help. But how do you think that the real solution, and how do you how can teams, like maybe Erik, you can also share more, like, how do you see teams or even open source projects are using AI to solve? I've seen like one example that I can talk about
Mhm.
is before CodeRabbit is used at Bun, which is very popular JS runtime, and before CodeRabbit was used on Bun repo, I've seen Jared Sumner and a lot of team members use a lot of AI. They have like a RoboBun which creates these PRs and does all of that. They used Claude Code to review some of the code. They actually used to analyze PRs with some of this code generators. I think there are some experiments in this area for AI with AI. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, fighting with AI does make sense, right? So, and especially like these models which are like tuned differently, and I can go into like how like the review is so different AI, and these are like not built in the same way, right? And going to back to open source question, I think open source is been a very interesting market segment or use case for us. Look at these maintainers; they are like doing all this like really thankless job of volunteering to maintain these projects, right? And not getting paid enough for that. And on top of that, like the really big bottleneck, especially for these popular projects, is because they have a lot of volunteers, like be it Home Assistant or be it the Bun project. Any popular project, like you have a lot of contributors, like Kubernetes project, we are in OpenShift, for example, like a lot of contributors there, right? And the bigger problem has been like these contributors are really being helpful, like curving and fixing the bugs, but at the same time, like how do you make sure they're not like messing up the quality of your existing code base and so on. So code reviews have been a thankless job for them. They're not even getting paid for it. Like in a big company, yes, your senior developers are paying massive amount of money, right, to just code review. But over here, it's been a really big pain point. And especially the security side, you've seen like some people have been, because they're not paying enough attention, some of these libraries are getting hijacked with malware. So that's also been like a big concern that even pre-Gen AI, like there were like hackers and all putting in like pull requests, which seem really okay on surface, but then they have like some small little like string differences where you could see that, okay, now they added a semicolon somewhere and now this becomes something else altogether and does something else or something very differently. So people have been like doing that as well. So that's something you can like really be effectively use AI to catch, right, on some of these critical projects. So that's where we're seeing like really big success as well. So right now, CodeRabbit is like one of the, I would say, number one solution on the open source side, being trusted by a large number of developers across like very popular projects.
I think too, Arvin, to your point of your question around like different tools and trying out things. I think there's a lot of the labs that are selling general agents, general solutions for everything. I think it's really good for selling a lot of subscriptions, and I, of course, like use all these tools and try everything. But like I'm looking outside at like skyscrapers here, and I'm thinking about like if I were going to build one, would I just hire like a general person off of like Fiverr or something like that? That's like a generalist to build a skyscraper for me, or would I want to have like a professional construction company that has built skyscrapers before and purpose built for that? And I think that metaphor, maybe I'm stretching it too far, it can extend to agentic tools where like, okay, like you can have a generalist thing, but if you want the job done really well, you should be focused on spending your money or your time with tools that are purpose built. And it does seem like that's where things are going. Like you try out something with ChatGPT, right? Like have it kind of make a scaffold of an app for you, or an idea around a new topic that you may not be an expert in, to kind of get you going faster than like maybe a random Google search would have helped you in the past. But now, then when you decide, okay, I really do want to like do a marketing campaign or something around a comic or something like this, maybe you do use like a AI to help, and you probably will get better results with like models and frameworks that are purpose-built for that domain.
I think that's a great point. I think that's where we see the first generation of these language models have been very general purpose. ChatGPT being the most general purpose interface. It's just chat and that's it, right? I mean, even the earliest versions were not even connected to the web. So they were just using the knowledge these systems had, right? and no Python tooling. Like if you ask a math question, they're using their LLM knowledge to do it, which is almost always wrong, right? Like the strawberry problem and all this, like 9.11 greater than something, right? So you've seen those tweets, right? So yeah, so I think what we're seeing now with the AI products in general, like I'm not talking about models now, we're talking about the whole AI agent systems that you're building around them. These are becoming super specialized, and you're bringing the right context in front of the models. You have some agentic capabilities. Maybe you have some sandboxes, because one of the things we have seen these agents are very good at is code generation. So even to take actions in the real world, you're using code. I would say I would argue that even code generation is a much more effective way of running agents versus tool calling like MCPs, right? And that's what even at CodeRabbit we had been like betting on for the last 2 years, right? The other area we have seen is like the earlier products or the earliest products always also expose the models to the end users. Like if you look at Cursor, the typical workflow is you are going to an agent and then you are doing two things. One is first of all, you love Cursor, and the second thing is you like Sonnet. Like that, those are the two combinations that work well. Sonnet is by far the number one model. Like I know they have their own model, but I think it's very lopsided. Like Sonnet is way more in usage. And what happens there is like it's gonna break because these systems are becoming super fine-tuned. These models are also diverging in a large way. Like whatever the context and the prompts you're writing for a family of models does not translate well to the other family. Like for example, something you've done with GPT-5 is very different than what you're going to do with Sonnet 4.5 at this time, right? And that's how we are seeing like the big differences, like the super specialization. Even the agents, there's also the concept of, I would say, slow AI and fast AI. Like when you are doing a synchronous work with an agent, you are going to do, you expect faster responses. You cannot have Cursor go on for like 8 or 10 minutes on a task while you're just staring at a screen. You're probably going to take your dog out for a walk. Or there's this like YC startup I heard, like which is like
Brain rot?
has an IDE where, yeah, something like that. Brain rot. The company's called something else, I believe, but they have this like you can play a video game or something while you're waiting for Cursor to run. But that's not what. Yeah, but that's one form factor. Like I mean, the people are trying where. But then Cursor is now coming up and saying, okay, we need to be super specialized, and we don't like Sonnet is not the model that we can rely on. That's why we want to invest in our own model that's fast and smart at the same time, designed for their use case. So they're very much investing in Composer. And the entire idea there is delivering fast responses. So you're in the flow, right? Now at CodeRabbit, we're taking a different approach, more of the slow AI approach. So we happen to be inside GitHub in more collaborative surfaces, right? Or in issue systems and so on, where you are basically doing asynchronous work. When you open a pull request, you're anyways running your CI/CD unit test, and this code review can run for 8 or 10 minutes. It's not synchronous, it's async. So the type of models and the flexibility, the context and the prompts are very different. Like some of our API calls to GPT-5.1, that the completion itself takes 3 minutes to complete. Right? That's the kind of context we stuff in and the reasoning on high setting and so on, which you typically cannot do locally. So these tools, like they started with very simple chat GPT, as you know, but they're evolving into much more nuanced, tuning it to the right UX, the right context. And that's what makes a big difference in the experience end of the day. The context, and the context engineering is the new term that's emerging around this.
So, I mean, if I ask one ending question to you, Harjot, and then even Erik, please share this one. How do you steer an AI coding agent today? Like, I think we all use AI. I think as a parting thought from this session today, like episode, how can developers keep the agent focused? What do you think that will help someone who is probably using AI?
Erik, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. Okay, sure. Well, my answer has changed probably at least 3 times this year to this question. Like maybe related to what Harjot was mentioning earlier around like the more and more of the tools are especially in the last like 2 months are especially from like Cursor, obviously with their own model coming out, Claude and Claude Code, and then with GPT-5 and GPT-5 Codex, like they work really well within the harness that they have. So like the Cursor model within Cursor, the Sonnet 4.5 within Claude Code and GPT 5.5.1 Codex stuff in Codex. Whereas like before, I was kind of picking like the harness, like the IDE, and not really thinking much about like the actual harness within it, and changing out models for different things. But now, like I'll go to Codex CLI for GPT-5 kinds of tasks, or Claude Code for what my intuition for those two different models and two different harnesses. Like Codex is really good at not doing other things. Where it's if I have a kind of coding task that I want that's very, very targeted, I would typically go to Codex, and I can wait like maybe a little bit longer for the response, but it's really good at staying on focus on task, and I don't have to explicitly prompt stay on focus on task or do anything kind of custom around its target to ensure that. Whereas Claude will still be like overly eager around like being helpful with other things. And so, I'll be like, okay, even if I prompt explicitly, I did this the other week, was like, just change this one thing. Don't go into any other files. And I was like, okay, like the first reasoning tokens that came back were like, okay, I'll only change this. And then the end result was like 5 markdown files around like the plans and all this stuff that were added. And then like a few changes to a few other files. I was like, okay, yeah, back to Codex for like those target things. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think one of the things that's emerging is like, feel free to throw away the work. Like if these agents have gone off track, just burn the ground, like restart, right? That's been one thing very effective for me, at least, because yes, you will start with a prompt and it's much easier to iterate on the prompt than to clean up, is what I learned. If you see that, okay, this ended up in a very wrong direction altogether, okay, then rather than go and keep fixing that in same conversation over multiple turns, I mean, if it's salvageable, please do it. But if it's like way off, I don't know, use a Git work tree or something, just nuke the whole thing, go back to your original prompt, figure out where it actually went wrong, where the confusion was, explain, like address that concern, and then restart. So that works like well. I think people are trying this like one-off end runs or something, but I think it's all about like iterating on the prompt itself versus reworking the actual work output. So it's okay to nuke it. The second thing is use different models. Like you pointed up a great point. Like you basically over the time, people are starting to build some skill set around what tasks are a good fit for, in general, AI and also different models. Like what we have heard from people is like use GPT-5.1 on high setting for planning if you want to like just plan the work, right? Or use Sonnet for actual file code generation, because it's like Sonnet's more like rote learning. It has like memorized a lot of good stuff. And 5.1 like things on the fly. Maybe the training data is not good with coding, but they have great IQ. The reasoning they do is really amazing. Like the best in class is what we have seen, but also can go off track. Sometimes it can do great, but sometimes it also goes off track. But yeah, for planning, like those lower models have been very, very effective. Whereas in the coding, like you want to sometimes like be in the flow. Even like Haiku makes a big difference in the UX. Even though it's not a very fast model, just because it's fast, you can iterate fast. Right. So some of these tasks which you want to like just do it, like have responses back in a few seconds. And these are like simple changes in some files. You can actually use Haiku for that. That's also been very, very effective. But your other point was very interesting that some of these harnesses are now tuned to the model. So in a way, like the harness was built around the model, but now the harness kind of is driving the model and some of this fine tuning. And we have seen like Anthropic sometimes is fine tuned to certain tags, like thinking tags, they will show up even if you don't prompt it, because they've like really tuned these models for function call XML. You will see that in output if you're not using the format. Like even though using the term tools in the prompt, it's going to make it do the wrong thing because they have like tuned so much to the word keyword tune or tools or MCPs that they end up generating those formats. So as a vendor, it's very difficult because Cloud Code and because most of the development is now being driven by the Cloud Code team working together with the Sonnet 4.5 model. So they don't see these issues. But once you take this model out into other harnesses, you see all these like weird quirks.
Yeah, I'm just thinking right after this call, I'm going to prompt Claude to like generate a contextual token of appreciation so that I can place it in my window and it'll probably just freak out. Like it's self-aware of like the context window stuff now too. So it's like, oh, my tokens, I think I should check on my context window size right now. Like if you're going in these kind of like long loops, it's super interesting. But yeah, like, what do you think would happen if you took like a Sonnet model and threw it in like Codex CLI, or vice versa, like GPT-5 and Cloud Code?
Well, they would work to some extent, but like we end up with like less optimal results, right? And especially because of fine tuning. And for us as a vendor, like even getting the right format is so difficult because these are so much tuned to their way of doing works. Like the bash tool they have is super specialized tool. They're fine tuned on it. They are fine tuned on a thinking tool, right? So those kind of things like do get in the way in time to time on if you want to do something very custom with these things, right? So you're right. I mean, if you're starting out, let's say as a vendor using agentic systems and use Cloud Code's agent, like not just for coding, it's a really good agent. So it's a good starting point. Then you figure out if you want to like a different agent, but those agents are really tuned to the models at this time. And I think Codex also now has an SDK. So yeah, I think those are like a little bit safer bets at this point, given that how off these mismatch can lead to like very weird results.
If you're going to build like a new agent application or startup or something today, would you, or advise one, would you say like, hey, try out a couple different models, then pick one and build everything around that, or build an abstraction layer interface that can work with many and knows the quirks of each? Like, how would you architect something like that or advise?
To be honest, our biggest bottleneck of the effort is like just evaluating these models. Like right now, we are mostly, for example, using OpenAI and Anthropic. We don't even have bandwidth to try Gemini 3 at this time because these two vendors, like the providers, every other week there's a model we are like looking at from these providers, and then you'll figure out whether it's working for your existing workflows. Has it broken something? So you can't really pick one model. First of all, the ground is constantly changing. Like on the open source side, it's even worse. Like there's so many models coming out every week. Over there as well, the bottleneck is the evals. Like, are these models even a good fit for what I'm trying to do? The profiles to performance. You can't even trust the evals done by other people. They're directionally correct, but they don't always apply to your use case. So that's like a very, very big pain point in the industry, right? And evals are very hard to get right. If you're looking at a wrong signal, you will end up with wrong results anyways, right? Like because the real world vibes and the taste is very different than what your data sometimes shows. So I would say my advice here is like really like, yes, I mean, you have to pick a model, you have to prompt custom for that. Like I think the era of letting the users pick a model is over. That one is for sure. Like in the next 6 to 9 months, we'll see even bigger divergence between your hardness and the and how these models are tuned to work with it, right? Because the prompting is so different across these systems now. So as a vendor, yes, I mean, pick a few providers that you want to work with and continue to just build evals around that. And each generation then is you expect that your workflows will break. The minor increments have been okay, but sometimes the generational leaps, like from, let's say, O3 to GPT-5 was a big leap for us. And Arvind can say, like, we can tell you, like, how many support tickets we saw. Like, yes, I mean, it was a big mess, right? I mean, yeah, our eval showed something that these were great models. We actually wrote a blog post around it. But once you go in the real world, then the feedback is so different, right? But then we were able to, like, tame the beast in many ways. Like we are still using that model, but we had to re-architect a lot of the context we were throwing in.
Yeah. I mean, this was a great discussion. I don't want to stop, and we entered the sweet spot, but then I think there's limits that we definitely could discuss in a call, right? I would really want to continue the discussion more about the technical architecture, how CodeRabbit actually works. And I think we put out a lot of content already, but then it's great to also discuss more about the nitty-gritties of our secure architecture and how we actually compile agents. So I think all of these are very interesting for everyone to watch. Super excited, and thanks for joining today. And I'm hoping that we could assemble again to do the cool thing, discuss more about agents, AI, and the cultural nuances. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.